we are waging this battle in the domain of politics, not because we want to, but because we have to.
What we're seeing now is the emergence of this conservative counter-elite or counter-cultural force simply emerging in place of where the progressives have vacated.
It is now up to us to determine the moral landscape, to determine what those terms of debate are going to be.
Real potentials need to be discovered, not imagined.
Hello, everybody. I am absolutely honored to be here to speak with you all today. The invitation to speak at AmFest was the last communication I ever received from Charlie. And I never had the opportunity to tell him how grateful and flattered I was to be invited to this event and speak on the main stage, no less. I was working up the right way to tell him how much this meant to me, and then in an instant, that opportunity was gone. So I'm going to express to you all now some of the ideas I wanted to tell Charlie then. First, I recognize that many of you may not know who I am. My name is Jonathan Keeperman. For 10 years, I was a lecturer in the English department at the University of California at Irvine. And truthfully, I love my job. I got to spend my working hours talking to smart and motivated young people about books and big ideas. But early in my career, I started to see things moving in a very bad direction. I started to see the university's mission change from encouraging the acquisition of knowledge for its own sake to enforcing an ever narrower set of political and moral ideas on its students and even its faculty. This became worse and worse over time, and it eventually became intolerable. The environment was particularly bad for men. It was even worse for white men, and even worse still for straight white men. But aside from all of that, if you were a conservative, if you had conservative values, and God forbid if you voted for Donald Trump, just forget about it. You did not belong there. Your beliefs had no place on campus. So I left my career, and I started a publishing company called Passage Press. Thank you. All of these smart young people who were cut out from publishing needed somewhere to go. I wanted to build something, however modest, where the talents of young writers could be cultivated and recognized. I had a young family to support at the time, and I had no idea what I was doing. But I had a mission. I had something I knew needed to be done, and I was going to do it. This is how Charlie found me. Charlie loved books. He knew that true understanding came from deep engagement with ideas, that you had to be constantly testing your assumptions against arguments from all sides. You had to know history, and not the Wikipedia version of history, or the version of history you might get secondhand through YouTube videos. You had to go to the source material. You had to take the time to set aside all of the distractions of the screen and crack open an actual book. But I had far more to learn from Charlie than he ever had to learn from me. He was 10 years my junior, but had wisdom and know-how well beyond anything I could understand. It wasn't just that he knew how to organize and how to build something from nothing. It wasn't just that he was a great communicator. He was all those things, of course. But he understood that to solve problems, even the biggest and most intractable problems, meant that you had to set aside your ego. You had to stow away your complaints and your disagreements with allies, however real they might be, in service of that larger project. Charlie did not take himself seriously, but he did take his responsibilities very, very seriously. Too often, I see the opposite of that in myself and in others. And I would encourage us all to take that lesson to heart. Your ego is not important, but your obligations to yourself and to your countrymen are incredibly important. Because Charlie knew this, he didn't throw tantrums. He didn't lash out. He didn't stomp his feet. He focused his efforts on building a winning machine. He brought good people together and allowed them to make the most of their strengths. Charlie cared deeply about the success of his allies and his friends because he knew that their success was his success. Charlie also knew something that I didn't know when I reluctantly became involved in politics. I had this idea that somewhere out there were the adults in the room, these smart, competent people who knew the score and knew how to do things, who at some point would come and wave their magic wand and fix our problems. But those people are not there. They don't exist. No one is coming to save us. We're going to have to do this ourselves. Charlie knew this. Charlie knew it was up to us. It was up to you, the people in this room. Lately, I've been finding myself reading these survival stories. I have a 10-year-old son, and he loves Gary Paulson's Hatchet books. These books are about a teenage boy who finds himself lost in the wilderness, and he has to survive. These are wonderful stories that demonstrate the virtues of perseverance and resourcefulness, but they've also led me to reading stories about real survival situations. A family of sailors who get shipwrecked in the middle of the Pacific. A team of researchers marooned in the Arctic at the onset of winter. A lone hunter deep in the Canadian Rockies, mauled nearly to death by a grizzly bear. A crew of fishermen capsized in an October squall in the sub-freezing waters of the Bering Sea. These stories, truthfully, are incredibly bleak. On their face, they suggest an unfair and hostile world. Perhaps worse than hostile, they suggest a world that is indifferent to our suffering. But I find great comfort in these stories. I find tremendous wisdom in them. How did these people endure these hardships? How did they defy all of the odds and come to tell the story of their own survival? The lessons from these stories, the through lines, and all of these harrowing episodes are in fact remarkably similar. They are simple lessons, and when you hear them, they may sound obvious. But they are not always so obvious to us in our moments of duress. They are not always so easy to come by when we find ourselves face to face with the overwhelming difficulties that life presents to us. And they are not reducible merely to moments of life and death struggle. These lessons are available to us every day in every fight we must undertake, be it in our personal lives or on the national political stage. In every case, success begins with the simple assertion, I am alive. And by virtue of being alive, I have agency. I have the power to make a choice to do something. Doing nothing is always easy. Doing nothing is always the path of least resistance. Instead of doing nothing, I am going to work up the strength to do one small thing that is going to improve my situation. I am going to reach my broken arm to a rock in front of me and drag myself another foot down the mountain. I'm going to cast this net into the ocean one more time, despite days of failed efforts, so that I might catch a fish and feed my family. Sometimes the small thing is simply choosing to not give up, choosing to stay in the game. Of the fishermen I read about who were capsized in the Bering Sea, several did not make it. The life raft they were in could not contend with these 40-foot waves that were thrown up by the storm. Again and again and again, the waves would flip the raft and toss these men into the icy water. Of the ones who did survive, it was because every time this happened, hundreds of times over their 3-day ordeal, they found the strength to swim back to the raft. That's what it means to stay in the fight. It means swimming back to the boat over and over and over again. It means simply declaring, "I will not give up," and then acting in accordance with that declaration. What is universal in all of these stories is a conscious decision to not be overwhelmed by the big picture of your circumstances, to not indulge in the despair of the existential crisis before you. The ocean is simply too big to consider what it might take to row across it in a dinghy. The Arctic is too cold and empty to imagine crossing 100 miles of it on foot. The survival situation taken from that perspective seems impossible. The plan becomes fuzzy, hard to see, and harder still to act on. And when we think about our own political situation, it is also true that it can seem too big to do anything about. Consider how thoroughly the left owns all our major institutions. Consider the sheer number of illegal aliens in this country and what it would take to solve this problem. Consider the rot in the federal government, how deep and immune it seems to corrective action. Consider the spiritual crisis of our nation. Who are we? What do we stand for? Can the America we once know be said to exist? We are without a doubt in a survival situation. And if there's anything I've learned from these survival stories, is that it does little good to indulge in the seemingly hopelessness of it all. Instead, we must resist the temptation to despair. We must not allow ourselves to be lazy or weak. There is a small forward step we can take right now, and we are going to take it. We are going to do one small thing to make our situation better. Every time the boat flips over, and it is going to flip over, we are going to make the choice to swim back to it. We are going to get back in the boat however long this takes. We are going to insist on staying in the fight. We are going to one day tell our own story of how we made it out. Thank you. This was an absolute honor. And thank you, Charlie, for the invitation.